Just the resource itself. You can assign it at the resource group level. If you assign it at the resource group level, let's say you assign it to this resource group and you have these resources under this resource group, then by default the resources will inherit the permissions at the resource group level. If you then have two resource groups that fall under a particular subscription and you define role-based access control at the subscription level, it will apply to all of the resource groups and hence all of the resources under those resource groups. Hence you can apply role-based access control at different levels. Also please note that there are different roles available. If I go onto the Microsoft documentation, when it comes onto the Azure inbuilt roles, if I scroll down, there are first of all these default roles in place. You have the contributor role that grants full access to managed resources, but you can't assign roles in to host virtual machines on a physical server. But in the end, you still need to buy those physical servers, and all of this costs money. You also need to buy the required storage, set up the network, etc. So for companies before the advent of the cloud platform, they would have a data center in place wherein they would have racks and racks of servers, storage, etc. With the help of the virtual machine service on the Azure cloud platform, a company does not have the burden of maintaining this data center. They don't need to buy any physical servers. All of this will be managed by Microsoft themselves. As part of the Azure cloud platform, they already have these physical servers, they already have storage in place that is hosted in these various data centers. On top of this physical infrastructure, Azure provides you the virtual machine service. So via the internet, on the Azure cloud platform, you can go ahead and quickly spin up a virtual machine. We're going to see this in subsequent chapters. Now, another important note when it comes to virtual machines. Now, normally if you look at a machine, so even if you look at your laptop, in your home environment or your mobile devices, all of them are basically part of a network. So your Wi-Fi router at home basically creates this network for you, and the devices that actually connect onto the internet, they all are part of this network that's basically managed by your Wi-Fi router. Similarly, for an on-premises data center, so let's say a company is managing their own servers, even there, those servers, whether they be application servers, database servers, etc., all of them need to be part of something known as a network. On the Azure platform, they provide you something known as a virtual network for hosting these virtual machines. So when you spin up a virtual machine, you have a resource that's based on the virtual machine service. In addition to this, you will see other resources that get created as part of the virtual machine resource, such as the network interface, the disk, network, security group, and the virtual network. Now don't worry, as we move along, as we start working with the various services on the Azure platform, you'll get a better understanding of these various services. In this chapter, I want to give first a quick introduction when it comes onto the virtual machine service. Now, in this chapter, we're going to go ahead and build a resource, our first resource, and this is going to be based on the Azure Virtual Machine Service. Here I've logged into my Azure account, I basically have the dashboard for the various services. Here on the left hand side, we have links onto the popular services and the popular links when it comes onto the Azure portal itself. In order to create a resource based on the virtual machine, service, you can start from various points. For example, I could click on create a resource here. When I do this, it takes me onto something known as the Azure Marketplace. In the Azure Marketplace, you will see the popular services right here. What are the popular products? And on the left hand side, you have the various categories as well. Or we could go on to all resources on the left hand side and hit on the create button here. Again, this will present me with the same screen when it comes onto the Azure Marketplace. When you start working with the various services on the Azure platform, you will actually get a better idea on how to navigate through the different aspects of the Azure portal. I could also just directly go on to virtual machines on the left hand side here and hit on the create button and choose an Azure virtual machine. This will actually take me directly now onto the wizard to create a virtual machine. So what we're doing right here is we are creating something known as a resource based on the virtual machine service. So what I've done right here is I've gone onto virtual machines. I hit on the create button to create a normal virtual machine. Let me minimize this, so let me hide this menu on the left hand side so that we get a better view of this particular wizard. So we are now presented with a screen in which we can specify the different properties, the configuration of our machine itself. So what we're trying to create here is I want to create now a server, let's say based on Windows Server, the operating system. I want this machine to be created on the Azure platform, on the Azure Cloud Service. Here on the top, we actually have the different categories of this particular wizard for creating the machine. On the basic screen, when it comes onto the project details, the first thing it is asking you is to select a subscription. Now, when you create your Azure account, you by default get a subscription in place. I'm going to choose one of the subscriptions that I have. Now, this subscription is used for billing purposes. When you create your first Azure free account, remember that you get $200 worth of free credit. So if there is any cost linked with the resources that you're creating on the Azure platform, it will be deducted from a $200 worth of free credit. If you have a pay as you go subscription, when you pay based on how much you use, again all of the costs goes against the subscription, and then you pay your bill on a monthly basis. This is from the billing aspect. The next step is to specify something known as a resource group. So every resource needs to be linked onto a subscription, and it needs to be linked onto a resource group. The resource group is actually used to logically group your resources. So let's say that you're spinning up resources for various services for a particular application. You can create something known as a resource group. It is free of cost. There's no cost associated with creating a resource group. And you could give the application name for the resource group and club all of those resources as part of that resource group. Currently, I don't have any resource groups in place. I can just hit on this create new button to specify a very simple name of a resource group. I'll hit on the OK button. Now next, I need to give a name for my machine. So let me give a simple name of app.vm. Next is the region, the location of your VM. When it comes onto a cloud platform, remember in the end, right, you are creating something virtually. Here we're creating a virtual machine. The virtual machine in the end needs to be hosted in some sort of physical data center in some location. Now, Microsoft does have different data centers around the world in which you can use the various services. Hence, when we now specify a location for the virtual machine, we need to give a location. Where do we want to host our virtual machine? And accordingly, that machine is going to be located in a physical data center in that particular region. I just choose a location of North. Europe. When it comes on to the availability options, which we'll look into later on, at this point in time, I'm going to choose no infrastructure redundancy required. I want to keep this as simple as possible. Next is an image. It is asking us to select an image. Based on this image, the virtual machine will be created. Now what I'll do is I do have some images in place. because I've recently used these images. I could also go onto the Azure Marketplace and search for images as well. Let me click on See All Images here. So I'm in the Marketplace. I can go on to Windows Server. I can select from a variety of options here. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to choose Windows Server 2022 Data Center x64 Gen 2. There are various versions when it comes onto Windows Server. So what I'm creating here is I want to create a virtual machine based on Windows Server. Please do not choose this Azure edition. I said I'm choosing Windows Server 2022 Data Center x64 Gen 2. So I have this image in place. See, what's the benefit of having this image? Let's say that you want to create a machine based on Windows Server. What would you need to do? First of all, you need to buy the product, right? Buy the license for Windows Server. Then download the software for installation purposes, and then install the software and configure it accordingly on a machine. And this would take time. So it could probably take an hour, it could take 2 hours, right? For installing and keeping that machine in place. But you will see in a moment's time that when I hit on the create button to create this virtual machine, it will be created in a matter of minutes. And that's because this image is already kind of a pre-built template that has Windows Server in place. It just becomes much more easier to create a machine based on this particular template, based on this particular image. I'll scroll down. The next thing is the size of the machine. So there are different sizes that are available. If I click on See All Sizes, currently I have D2S_V3. With this particular VM size, I am getting 2 virtual CPUs, 8 gigs of memory, the ability to attach 4 data disks, so on and so forth. So based on the size that you choose, you get allocated, your VM basically gets allocated a number of virtual CPUs, some amount of RAM, the ability to have other features linked onto this particular virtual machine. Now if I go onto the page, when it comes onto the Azure free account, if I scroll down, when it comes onto what you get for free for 12 months, you get 750 hours of Windows machines for free based on B1S. Here if I search for B1S, I can see that we do have the size in place. Now when it comes onto this particular size, you only get 1 virtual CPU and 1 gig of RAM. So this is like the basic level when it comes onto the hardware. Yes, it is free of cost, but please note that you don't get much when it comes onto a virtual CPU. You don't get much when it comes onto RAM. Yes, you can create a machine based on the size, and we will do that right now. So I'm going to choose B1S. I'll click on this and hit on select. We can create a machine based on the size, but please note that because you only have 1 virtual CPU and 1 gig of memory, it becomes difficult to go ahead and actually install anything. See, once you have a machine in place, obviously you want to start installing softwares on the machine. You want to host, let's say, your application. With 1 virtual CPU, you can't do much with 1 gig of memory. You need to scale your size accordingly. But just for the moment, to show you that you can create a machine based on the size, I'm going to leave it as B1S. Next is the details of the administrator account. You mentioned the details here. These details will actually allow you to log into the machine. So let me put, let's say, a name of admin user. For the password, there are some restrictions. If I just give a very simple password, here you will see the constraints for the password itself. So you can mention your own password based on these constraints. The password which I'll mention is Microsoft@2020, just as a sample password. You can obviously create your own password. We need to confirm the password here. And then there are some other configuration parameters in place, such as the inbound port rules. So I'm not touching this right now. If I want to go on to the next screen, right? So there are a lot of screens for the configuration of this machine. I'll go on to next for the disk. By default, it's going to attach something known as an OS disk, the operating system disk. This is obviously required for the machine. You can also add something known as data disk as well. And I said, don't worry, whatever's important from the AZ-104 perspective, we're going to cover those later on. If I go on to networking, what this wizard is going to do is, it's going to create that virtual network for you. So I told you machines need to be part of a network. And when it comes onto the Azure platform, by default, they have a service known as the Azure Virtual Network Service. The virtual machine is going to be part of this virtual network. So automatically this wizard is going to create a virtual network for you. It's going to create something known as a subnet within the virtual network. It's going to create and assign something known as a public IP address. This allows connectivity from the internet onto your machine. Please note there are various other ways that we can achieve this, but for now, since we're keeping things simple, this wizard is also going to create a public IP address and assign it onto your machine. I scroll down, leave the other aspects as they are. We can go on to the management screen. There are a lot of features available with the services when it comes onto the Azure platform. I'm going to go on to the last, the review and create screen. In the review and create screen, here you can see what is a cost per hour. I mean, one of the common questions I get from students is, when you choose the size of the machine, here it's saying it's $11 per month. So they ask me that when I create this machine right now, am I going to be charged directly upfront $11 per month? And the answer is no. What you get charged is based on how much you use, and that's based on an hourly basis over here. Right, so it's 0.0153 based on the cost in this particular region for hosting this virtual machine. And please note that if you are using the Azure free account during the first 30 days, you get that $200 worth of free credit. So whatever you consume here when it comes onto the cost will be deducted from that credit itself. Now I can scroll down and I can just hit on the create button. Before I do that, let me open up again the menu. Let me right click on all resources and open the link in a new tab. So we can open multiple tabs when it comes onto the Azure portal. In all resources, you can see right now we don't have anything in place. It's a blank screen, right? We have not defined any resources. I'm going to hit on the create button. This is now going to start the process of creating the virtual machine along with the other resources that are required. Now, this might take around 4 to 5 minutes. Let's mark an end onto this chapter and move on to the next. Now I've come back after around 4 to 5 minutes. I can see my deployment is complete. If you go on to notification, even here also you will get a notification when the deployment has succeeded. So when you perform an operation on the Azure platform, you will also get a notification as well. I can click on go to the resource. This will actually take me now onto my app VM, which is a virtual machine now. On the left hand side we have different categories in place, and if you go on to the overview, you will see the overview about the machine. You will see the size, you will see the OS, etc. It's currently in the running status. In the other tab in all resources, let me hit on the refresh button. When you hit on the refresh button, you can see a number of resources in place. You will see your virtual network that is used for hosting the machine. You will see the virtual machine resource itself. You will see the public IP address, the network security group, the network interface, the OS level disk, and there's something known as a network watcher resource. If I expand this and go on to resource groups, you will see your app GRP resource group in place. You will also see another resource group that gets automatically created when you deploy the virtual machine itself. We now have a machine running on the Azure cloud platform. We can now connect onto the machine. Now this is based on Windows Server 2022. So when you want to connect onto a Windows machine, you use RDP, that's the remote desktop protocol. If I hit on the connect button here, I can choose RDP. It will do some basic connectivity checks. It will connect via the public IP address. I will download the RDP file. It downloads the RDP file on your local machine, on a laptop basically. I'll click on this RDP file, hit on the connect button. I'm going to enter the credentials that I had mentioned when creating this virtual machine itself. So what was the username and the password? I'll click on yes here. And now you will get a remote desktop session onto the machine itself. So you're seeing that within a matter of minutes, you now have a full-fledged machine running on the cloud platform. This is based on Windows Server 2022. You can then start installing different softwares, hosting your applications, etc. And here the best part is you only pay based on how much you use. You don't need to have any physical infrastructure in place. This particular machine is being hosted on some physical server in a data center in the North Europe location. Right, so let's mark an end onto this chapter wherein we have now connected onto the machine itself. Hi and welcome back. Now in this chapter I just want to give a quick note when it comes on to troubleshooting connections onto your virtual machine. So maybe you are not able to connect onto the machine itself. See, in my case, right, or in your case, we are connecting from, let's say, our laptop via RDP, that's a remote desktop protocol, via the internet onto the virtual machine hosted on a virtual network. There could be various reasons as to why you cannot connect onto the virtual machine. One of the common reasons I've seen is if you're trying to connect from, let's say, a company laptop, a company provided laptop, that company laptop might be having restrictions in place when it comes on to connecting to external data sources. So you may not be able to connect onto that virtual machine because of the restrictions from your company laptop. So in my case, I'm basically using my personal machine to actually work with the Azure-based services. Also, I will ensure to provide a link right onto the Microsoft documentation wherein they have different procedures that you can actually follow in case if you can't connect onto an Azure virtual machine. So just go through it. This is in case if you have connectivity problems. I want to give this quick note before proceeding ahead. Now in this chapter I'm going to install something known as a web server role on our machine. So we've spun up a machine based on Windows Server 2022. When you spin up a machine on the cloud, you want to install some sort of workload, some sort of software. In our case, I always want to keep things simple. I want to install something known as Internet Information Services on our machine. This allows you to basically host web services on the machine itself. So from a browser on your laptop, you can actually send requests via port 80. Internet Information Services, which is the web server, which will be installed on the Windows machine, actually listens for HTTP requests on port 80. So the first thing you would want to do is after spinning up a machine, you want to install something to see, whether you can actually make use of the machine itself. So let's go ahead. Now here I'm logged into the machine. I'm actually getting an error. Now you might not get a similar error. You might get a screen in which you can actually see the Windows Server desktop. But in my case now, I'm getting an error. And these errors are going to come up Because we have created a machine based on the size of B1S, that is only giving one virtual CPU and 1 gig of memory. Hence you are bound to run into errors. Hence, before proceeding ahead, I'm going to close this particular session. I'm going to increase the size of my virtual machine so that we can proceed ahead. See, when it comes on to the Azure based exams, especially for AZ 104, you are expected to work with the various services whether they are free or not. There is no specification saying that you can actually carry out all what is expected of you to know in the exam using the free services. They give you the free services, yes, to play around, to work with. But in the end, when it comes on to enhanced exams like AZ 104, you are expected to understand various other concepts as well. Hence, in order to proceed ahead, in order to show you these concepts, right, I'm making use now of an instance size that is not part of that feature of given free as part of the 12 months. But we still need to learn, right? We still need to move on ahead. And so the best thing when it comes onto the Azure platform or any cloud computing platform is you pay based on how much you use. So at any point in time, we can go ahead and delete all of our resources so that we don't incur an increased cost. We can very easily now change the size of our machine. Here for RPM, on the left hand side, I can click on size. Because currently it is B1S. If I scroll down, I'm going to choose D2S underscore V3. That gives me 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. I'll click on the resize option. And just like that, it's now going to resize our machine so that we have more number of virtual CPUs and a higher amount of RAM. This should just take a minute or two. Once the resize is complete, if I go on to the overview, we are still showing a standard B1S. You click on the refresh button. If I click on the refresh button, I can see it is standard D2S V3. It's still not refreshed in terms of the size. It will do it in a moment's time. But let's again connect onto the machine. I can go onto my downloads folder where I have the remote desktop file for RPM. I'll click on this, hit on the connect button. Let's connect onto the machine again. Just enter my password. And now I can see I'm getting the desktop screen when it comes onto Windows Server. I'm just waiting for Server Manager to launch up. This is basically part of the Windows Server ecosystem. After waiting for a couple of minutes, it's now time to install that web server role I talked about. For this, I'm going to click on Add Roles and Features. It will present you with a wizard. I'll click on the next button. Click on the next button again. Selecting my server, click on the next button. Here we have different roles in place. I'm going to choose this web server role. This will install Internet Information Services. I'll click on Add Features. Go on to Next. Go on to Next. And then finally click on the Install button. You can download any software from the internet, the software of your choice, and install it accordingly. But what I'm doing is pretty simple. There is already these roles that you can actually install when it comes onto Windows Server. Hence, I'm making use of that feature and installing Internet Information Services. This basically installs a web server on your machine. This will take around 3 to 4 minutes. Let's come back once the installation is complete. So I'm waiting for a couple of minutes. The installation has succeeded. Let me hit on the close button. If I now go on to app VM, if I copy the public IP address, see what we have now is you have a web server running on this Windows server on the Azure platform, and from the browser on a laptop we can now go on the public IP address and actually request for the home page of Internet Information Services, because we have a web server now running and listening for requests on the default port of port 80. If I copy the public IP address, go on to another tab, what's happening right now is you will not be able to reach the web server running on this machine even though we have installed it. And that is because of something known as network security groups. We're going to go through that a little bit later on. The network security group is kind of a lightweight firewall in place for your machine. It basically filters the inbound and the outbound traffic. How do I allow requests onto my web server? If I go back onto my app VM resource, onto the networking section, you get, I said, something known as network security groups. Let me go ahead and just hide this for the moment. I told you that we will actually go through this a little bit later on. But what we have to do here is we need to add something known as a rule. That rule will actually allow requests from the internet to reach port 80 on this machine. And Internet Information Services by default is listening on port 80 for web request. I'll click on the add inbound port rule here. In terms of the destination, in terms of the service, I want to search for the HTTP service. That's port 80. Scroll down, the action is allow. Let me click on add. We're now adding a rule onto this network security group that will allow requests on port 80. As soon as you add a rule, within a minute itself it should take effect. Right, so we have the rule in place. If I go on to the tab wherein we are browsing for the public IP address for our VM, it's trying to automatically refresh over here. And now you will see the home page of Internet Information Services. So now a request is going from your laptop onto the Windows server being hosted on the Azure platform, and because you have installed that role of the web server, that web server is sending a response back of the default page for Internet Information Services onto the browser. Right, so in this chapter I want to give a very simple use case on how you can basically install a workload on your machine. Hi and welcome back. Now in our case you will still bear associated for pricing resources. Here let me search for, so you can go ahead and create something known as a budget alert. Currently I already have one in place. Let me go ahead onto this monthly budget and delete the budget and recreate again, so we can for virtual machine. You want to ensure that you don't bear additional cost. So let's say you're done for the day. So be aware that there could be cost associated with the other resources as well. For example, when it comes on the disk, there is a separate cost for the disk as well. If you delete the virtual machine without deleting the disk, or let's say you stop the virtual machine, so when you stop the machine you don't bear a cost when it comes onto the machine itself, the running cost, but you will still bear a cost for the disk, right? There's no way to stop the disk. Hence, from a costing perspective, you should always understand that in addition to looking at the cost for the primary resource, like in this case the virtual machine, you also have to understand there could be an associated cost with the related resources as well. Now, there are different ways in understanding these costs. You can actually
today coming to NLB template. When it's off the track, for example, it's X. So when we represent X, that means that the state. There will be first and discrete action space. Right? For the steering angle, this is a default parameter. You can just train it on this. Right? I promise you that it will go around the track. May not be in a good boundary. 1400.
Training purpose here, we can actually shorten it.
So this is the example parameter of distance from center. Right? This is exactly what you guys have from line 27 onwards. Right? Closest waypoint, if in line, that this is just something.
And which part is relevant for.
Okay. And then lastly,
waypoints to improve your reward is to force it to turn left as hard as possible around there. Turning left. Right. The laptop.
Just a week before the F1.
In the open version, so student version you can't do actions. And you do more and waypoint. Just like you said, your driving instructor asks you to look further ahead. This strategy is looking further ahead. Yes?
customers.
Practitioner for free. Maybe Shanikas can
Alright everyone, thanks for attending to this session. We'll be closing the Zoom session in a few minutes, or actually we are trying to close it now. Those of you who are on site, we're actually done as well, but if you do have some questions, I think the team is still here, you can ask a bit more.
So for those who's curious, what's the prizes?
last season. Out the Belgian against Ortega, the German.
Very confident penalty. Struck with authority. Made sure the connection was clean. Again into the corner. Two very, very good penalties from Arsenal's point of view. And this puts the pressure on Bernardo Silva.
It's the 10th time in this competition's history it's gone to penalties, and Bernardo Silva steers Manchester City onto the scoreboard.
Well, that's unstoppable, because that is right in the corner. And that's what you're taught as a penalty taker. You hit the side net, and there's no chance really the goalkeeper can save those.
And we've been through this rigmarole before at Wembley. Bukayo Saka. Painful Euro memories for him. Missed earlier in pre-season, but this time no mistake.
Yeah, I think he took that extra half a second just to try and sit Ortega down and wrap his left foot around it and take it in the other direction. Calm penalty, even though he's under pressure.
Same side that he attempted to locate against Barcelona at SoFi last week. And he rolled it wide today on target. Rodri, Champions League final hero. This time thwarted by Ramsdale.
Pressure, because Kevin De Bruyne missed his. Every Man City player that's up next is under pressure. Arsenal so far flawless. It's not a good penalty. If you're going for power, you've got to drive it and drill it down the middle.
(3-1) Arsenal. And that means that Fabio Vieira can win it for the Gunners here and now. Portuguese, whose Arsenal career so far has been spent on the fringes. To make contributions, he scored a spectacular goal against Barcelona in Los Angeles. This to win the Community Shield of 2023. It's Fabio Vieira, it's a terrific penalty, and it's Arsenal's day beneath the arch.
What a penalty. What a hit.